This morning, I want to ask everyone here about something. Parents usually want big things for their children. Wouldn't you agree with that? How many of you parents want your kids to have a better life than you? For that matter, how many of you grandparents want your grandkids to have a better life than you've had? Raise your hand. How many of you would like to see that? Just about everyone here. We want good things for our kids. And at the same time, most kids have some kind of aspirations. Not all do, but most do. Wouldn't you agree with that? I won't ask for a show of hands on that because that can be embarrassing to a kid, and I don't want to do that this morning. But I think back when I was 16 or 17, I had an aspiration that I knew was going to be my life journey. I was going to manage or own 500 or 600 acres, and I was going to be the herdsman for about 100 purebred polled Hereford cows. Now, suffice it to say, my life took some different turns from that. Oftentimes, though, those paths that the parents want for the children and that the children want, they can clash. For example, my parents had dreams of me following my father's lead. My father was lifetime military. Let's just say that was never something I could see myself doing, although looking back, it would have probably done me a lot of good to do that. But that was what my parents really envisioned me doing. But then when I showed interest in getting away from home and also interest in the agriculture industry, they were really looking at me as doing something else, because I had shown interest in attending Auburn University in Alabama. My parents immediately wanted me to be what? Anybody know? From Auburn. A veterinarian. They've got a great vet school at Auburn University. They wanted me to do that. But let's just say this. I love animals. I love animals a lot. All kinds. But I simply could not see myself making a living treating sick animals. Maybe you can relate to that. Maybe not with those particular choices, but maybe the parent-child disagreements on the direction your life should take. My guess is, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but my guess is that many of you in here today could relate to what I've just talked about. Like I said, it might not be the same choices, but it can be that clash between the parent and the child. Let me just encourage you. Let me beg you, don't lose sight of Jesus. Don't lose sight of what He wants. Never underestimate what you can do in His kingdom. That's a mistake I made when I was about 25 years old, and I deeply regret it. There's one thing I want you to take from today's message, that regardless of your age or your status in life, it's very, very simple. It's easy to remember, but it's the true key to success. Seek Jesus. Just seek Jesus. That's it. Seek Jesus. Just seek Jesus. As you know, I've been in a series called All About Jesus. This morning, our message will be looking at John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. And the title of the message this morning is simply, Seek Jesus. Just seek Jesus. There are many stories in the Gospels about people who sought Jesus. Some of those people sought Jesus for the right reasons, some of them not. Today I want to look at an account of a man who sought Jesus out of desperation, but he eventually learned that his life needed to be all about Jesus. I want you to read along with me in John chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. And as I usually do, I'm reading from the English Standard Version this morning. And here we read, "So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, 'Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe.' The official said to him, 'Sir, come down before my child dies.' Jesus said to him, 'Go, your son will live.' The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, 'Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him.' The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, 'Your son will live.' And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee." You know, it's always interesting when you read the Gospels to see the dynamic involved in the stories and in events like this. And this story, I think, gives us some insight for today, especially considering that we have designated this Sunday as Youth Sunday. Whether you are a parent, whether you are a member of the youth, whether you're a grandparent, aunt, or uncle, let me just implore you again to seek Jesus. Just seek Jesus. This morning I want to look at a couple of things. They're in your bulletin there in your insert. The first one is simply seeking Jesus. You know, this is a term that we often hear in today's society, especially in Christian circles. But sometimes I have wondered if the people calling on others to do this really understand what seeking Jesus, what following Jesus really entails. Do they understand that following Jesus is more than just having a big spiritual benefactor who does what we want? That's not what following Jesus is. This week, I saw this Facebook meme that summarizes pretty much of what the world sees as following Jesus. It's from a man named Shane Pruitt, who's a Baptist minister in Texas. And he said, if you're worshiping a God who always agrees with you, then you're probably not worshiping the real God, but a glorified version of yourself. I'm going to leave that up there a minute. Think about that. Is that what many people think following Jesus is? It's just having God agree with everything you say? Too often we look at following Christ as doing something just to better themselves. And ironically, that's what we see the man in the main point of this text today. That's what we see him doing. He was just trying to say, Jesus was doing something I want. Let's look at this story again. This is such an interesting story. I hope you had your Bibles and was looking at it up. We'll be looking at several of the verses throughout it. But I think it's such an interesting story because this man, he had a sick son. And if you look at the text, you're going to see he was willing to do anything possible to help his son get well. Can you relate to that? Have you had an illness in your family, especially amongst your children, that you would do anything make a trip of any distance to make sure they get well or try to get them well. I think everyone in here would say yes to that. John said in verse 46, he said this man was an official. We're not told what that was, but he was apparently someone who was officially attached to King Herod Antipas. And he lived in Capernaum. But he heard that Jesus was going to be in Galilee. Capernaum was about 16 miles away. But look again what John says starting in verse 47. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was where? At the point of death. There's something that you see if you look at this in the original language, and I'm no Greek scholar, but reading the Greek scholars, they say that there's a picture in this language that we don't really capture in English. It said he repeatedly was begging Jesus to heal his son, repeatedly going before him. He'd heard that Jesus was a great miracle worker, so he thought it was worth that 16-mile trip, and he was begging Jesus, heal my son. But his approach wasn't because he believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that Jesus was the Messiah. Why did he approach Jesus? He'd heard he was a miracle worker, and he wanted his son to get well. He was desperate. John MacArthur noted said, in light of verse 46, apparently the nobleman's motivation centered on Jesus' reputation as a miracle worker rather than mission. And I think it's interesting that you see what Jesus said to him. Man had been begging him, and Jesus said, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And the word you there is in the plural in the Greek language. It's in plural. So he wasn't just addressing this man, but he was saying to all the other people that were around him, said, y'all just want to see signs and then you'll believe. Unless you do that, you won't believe. In other words, what Jesus is saying, you're more interested in miracles than my mission. And oftentimes, we do the exact same thing. Perhaps not with the same request of heal my son, but we look for something for ourselves. Jesus, heal me. Jesus, please get me out of this mess. Jesus, I need this job. Have you heard people make those kind of prayer requests? Now, don't get me wrong here. Jesus did say to pray to him, did he not? Jesus said to pray. James, the brother of Jesus, tells us in his epistle to pray for those who are sick. Jesus used the parable of a persistent widow. So he's not saying, don't pray for my divine intervention. That's not what he's saying. The point is that Jesus was saying, I'm more than just a miracle worker. I'm more than just someone who's going to do something that you like. We must truly seek him if we are going to understand that he is the Son of God and our Savior. That's what we must do. Seek Jesus. And I pray that your life is focused upon seeking Jesus. And if we seek Jesus, we'll do something. The second point today. Seeing Jesus. Seeing Jesus. Not just seeking him, but seeing him. Let's start in verse 50. Jesus said to him, go, your son will live. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. I've read this text many times in my life, but there was something about this passage that I had never really considered until this week when I was finishing up or preparing this message. Jesus, think about this. Jesus granted this man's request even though Jesus corrected him. Go back again. He said, unless you see the signs and the miracles, you're not going to believe. So Jesus was correcting this man and the people around him. Yet what did Jesus still do? He answered the man's plea and prayer. Jesus showed graciousness even though the man was making a demand or making a request that wasn't based on Jesus being the Son of God, but he saw him as a miracle worker. Folks, that's grace. That's grace. The man didn't see Jesus as under his mission, and Jesus knew that, yet he still granted the man's request, his son's healing, even though the man didn't deserve it. He didn't merit it. And that's what Jesus offers us. How many of us deserve Jesus' grace? None of us. Not one of us deserve it. It's a grace we don't deserve, and a grace that pays a price we can't pay. And Jesus still does this today. Yes, God still works. God still heals people, and He answers prayers. I think if I were to ask every one of you individually, you could probably tell me someone that you know that God has definitely answered prayer. Some of you might actually say, this is what He's done in my life, and I know it was an answered prayer. God does get people out of messes, big messes. He's led addicts and drunkards to lives of sobriety. He's healed broken marriages. He's restored families. He's rebuilt churches and restored relationships. But let's remember that as great as all those things were, they're all still temporary. Because eventually we are all going to die. We are all going to face death. And there's life beyond the grave. That was Jesus' mission. John chapter 3, verse 17, a verse I've quoted many times, and actually looked at it a couple of weeks ago here. John 3:17 says, "For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him." Luke chapter 19, verse 10 says that Jesus came to do what? To seek and save the lost. We have to overcome this temptation to make God into our own spiritual Santa Claus. We have to overcome this temptation to blame God for our troubles and realize our troubles are the result of sin. After Adam and Eve sinned, what happened? The whole earth was cursed. And that curse will be there until Christ returns to usher in a new earth. Jesus' miracles were there to establish His authority as the Son of God. Jesus' miracles were there to show that He had the power to carry out His eternal mission of salvation. Never lose sight of that. Never lose sight of the fact that Jesus' mission is our salvation. You know, I've got 4 kids and a stepson. I want them to all be very successful in life. But if they're successful in life and don't follow Christ, develop a relationship with them, then I have faith. If you have children and they are taught to be successful in life, but that not taught to develop a relationship with Christ, then we failed. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit there and say, yeah, there are instances where kids come out of those kind of homes and they still reject it. I know that. But generally speaking, people today tend to focus upon the success in life instead of with Jesus. And if you're really preparing your children for a life with Jesus, I am so thankful for that. Keep it up. Too often, though, I find people that are focused upon their football, their baseball, or basketball, volleyball, maybe their band, or anything like that. But if we have focused more on that than developing a real relationship with Jesus Christ, then you fail. And we need to re-examine our priorities. I wrote sports, and I still do it on a very freelance basis. I've done it for 40 years. During COVID, somebody asked me how many gymnasiums I had been in the state of Kentucky. And of course, during COVID, there wasn't much you can do, so I sat down and just off the top of my head, I came with a little over 100 of them. A little over 100 I'd worked in. And that doesn't, I don't know how many high school football fields and college gyms and all that, but I've been all over. 40 years. During those 40 years, I've never covered a local kid who made the major leagues in any sport. Not any. I saw 2 opposing baseball players who made it to the major leagues and stayed. Neither were stars. They bounced around, is the word we used. I saw, coming to you to finish up today's message from my living room. Our battery ran out. I thought it was important to finish up what we were saying, and so I'm picking up where we left off. Where I left off in the first part there that we mentioned is I was a sports editor the Anderson News for 34 years, and I've worked as a freelancer since then, so 40 years. I've been to over 100 high school gymnasiums. In that time, I've seen a lot of good athletes. I've seen athletes that's played high level of college basketball, college baseball, college football. But during all that time, I saw no local players make the major leagues in baseball. I saw 2 opposing baseball players make the major leagues. Both of them neither one of them were stars. They both bounced around, the people say. I only saw 4 players make the NBA, and only 2 were significant in their careers. I saw 2 players make the WNBA. Now, what I'm saying here, I could give you all kind of stats, which I've done once before in a message at Mackville. I'm just telling you what I saw. That's the reality. The odds are against us. I'm not saying that you shouldn't dream with your children. I'm not saying that. But people put so much emphasis on sports and miss Jesus. The odds are against you to be a big-time sports star. I'm not saying not to play the sports. I'm not saying that. But don't lose sight of Jesus. Don't seek success in music or the arts and forget Jesus. If you've ever gone to Nashville, you've seen people playing their guitar on the sidewalk or in a restaurant with a tips bucket. What they're doing is they're hoping that they're good enough, and hoping just out of the blue that somebody, the right person, hears them. Most don't make it. In fact, a very well-known Christian bluegrass artist told me once several years ago, said, you've got to be good, you've got to have that sound, and you've got to have the right person hear you. Again, I'm not saying to squelch your dreams. I'm not saying that. I'm saying don't overlook Jesus. Don't forsake Him. Remember the words of the great song that we sang. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face. and the things of earth will go strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. There's one other thing I want to share with you in this passage we've been looking at from John chapter 4. I don't want you to miss this when you talk about seeing Jesus. Listen, John chapter 4, verse 51 and following. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour that he began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now a second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. The boy's condition improved immediately when Jesus said, your son will live, at exactly that same time. That prompted this official to believe, not in the miracle worker, but in the Son of God. That's what he did. Not just the official, but his entire household. You see, the official that we see talked about in John chapter 4 went out of his way to seek Jesus. He truly sought Jesus. Now, he went seeking a miracle worker. But even though he might have been in error, he did truly seek Jesus. And one day, the next day, he saw who Jesus really was and who Jesus is today. That can be you. That can be you. There are some of you that are watching this video that might be really seeking Jesus. You're really looking for help. You have a problem that you need someone to help you. My advice to you is to keep looking. Keep studying his word. Keep praying. Jesus is there for you. And if you're truly seeking him, not just looking for some temporary fix, but truly seeking him, you will come to see that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is the one that can change your life, because he is the one who gave his life for you. As I close today, just remember, seek Jesus. Just seek Jesus. We'll see you next week at Mackville Christian Church.